All right. Hi, Marina.
Hi, Stacy. It's good to see you.
Great to see you. I can't wait until I get to see you in person.
Me, me too. It's just a weird time, very unusual, um, but at the same time interesting
Yeah.
because I guess we discover some things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to. Sometimes we need to be shoved into the forefront of life the way it is, not the way we plan it, not the way we imagine it, but just the way it is, and see what we can discover in it.
I love that.
So,
I think about what you say all the time about this year and this time and these changes that we're all experiencing in our own ways of uh, getting us out of the autopilot of our lives that we felt like we had so easily control over. And this year is forcing all of us to reflect on how we live our lives.
and actually, an illusion of control because
Mhm.
we thought we had uh, absolute control or mostly controlling our life. And I believe it's an illusion that we were not aware of. And this pandemic just showed us that sometimes when we plan things one way, life really turns a different direction. And it's like a river. Life has always been compared to a river that just flows. And sometimes it flows, it has an unusual turn, or sometimes it divides into two and has an island in between, and you don't know which way to go and what to choose. And just go with the flow of life. It's, I believe, all we need to learn to do, whether we like it or not, whether it's comfortable or not. For most people, it is not comfortable because we like continuity, we like predictability. Um, but flowing with the flow of life, I think it's one of our great, uh, first of all, abilities as human beings, but also a skill that we need to learn.
My like whole body is relaxing in thinking about flowing with life instead of trying to manipulate or figure out life versus just be able to flow.
I would say it's rather unusual, frankly, because many people, many clients that I work with, when they think about flowing and especially imagining a river and flowing with the flow of the river, they immediately dance, right? The opposite from what you said, because they feel that they have no control and the river of life carries them. And from my perspective, I'm with you. I love this flow and I'm relatively relaxed in this flow, and I trust the water. I think a big part of it is just trusting the water when you are in the river, an actual river. But if we're talking about life and using river as an analogy, as a metaphor, then just trusting life. And I think this is something that many of us, most of us, need to develop a skill again,
Yeah.
because it's a skill. It's some people, it's easier for some people than for other people, no question about that, but it's a skill that can be learned. Trusting the life, it's like teaching a child to swim.
Mhm.
What do we do? First we put our hands and just move your hands and legs, arms and legs, and then we eventually say trust the water.
Mhm. Yeah.
So trust the water, it will carry you. Just trust that it will carry you. Relax, let's go, don't fight. And I believe this is what most of us do in life, is fighting, constantly fighting, struggling, climbing ladders, trying to prove something to ourselves and others. And all these are actually the opposite of going with the flow. In some cultures, actually, going with the flow is used with negative connotation. It means you just don't do anything, you don't use your will power, you just, okay, you just go with the flow, with a negative connotation. And it's very unfortunate because if we combine just again, let's use this metaphor of a river, that we are floating, but in addition, we are paddling. So the speed enhances, and the efficiency of our movement also enhances. So it's using our willpower, but also using the power of the universe, the power of life to move forward, not paddling against the stream, which most of us do most of the time.
I love that, because I would say even in our culture in the US, going with the flow has a bit of a lazy or negative connotation, but going with the flow doesn't mean doesn't mean you're not swimming. You're just swimming with the current instead of against the current.
Well said, well said. And do you have any kind of, what does this thinking about the flow of life, maybe some examples from your own life come to mind, and I will think also from my life when we swim down the river or we swim against the river.
I think for me, a lot of the big life decisions I've made have been with the river, without knowing quite why I'm making the decisions, or why the river is leading me in one direction or another. I remember graduating college and wanting to move to Chicago, and I had never been to Chicago. And I say I didn't even know it got cold in Chicago, but the river, my river, was leading me there. And I didn't ask a lot of questions. It was more just flowing. And I ended up moving and living there for 6 years, and loving my experience there. So yeah, maybe
It sounds
my
like you.
flow is tied to also my like inner guidance and intuition.
Exactly. This is what I wanted to comment on, that it sounds like when you go with the flow, you also follow your heart. So going with the flow and following your heart. So when we follow our heart, we are more likely to get into the flow of life. Is that what you meant? That it felt right?
Yes, exactly. What
Mhm.
about you?
For me, the example that comes to mind immediately is when I came to this country. And as you know, I had my bachelor's and master's degree in psychology back home in Ukraine. And I taught psychology at the university. And when I came here, because of the language barrier and cultural barrier, I spoke some English. I barely understood English because my ears had to adjust to a new language. And it was a few years of struggles, culturally, emotionally, and physically, financially. Um, and I never thought I would be able to go back to my field. And I actually worked with my husband for a company, and it was great for the first year to learn. It helped me. I worked as a business development manager for in for a big corporation, and it taught me a lot. And my English has improved. But after a year, I started going to work with tears in my eyes every day, because I realized that it's not what I love to do, because I'm interested in so many things, but I'm not interested in politics and economics. And the company was selling political and economic news. So I was completely out of sync with what my heart was telling me. And it's been a while since I was crying and going and working, knowing that I'm an immigrant. I have to be grateful for the job that I have. And then one day I just woke up and decided I will apply for doctorate programs in different universities. I'm going back to my field. And 3 months later, I was accepted into 2 universities. I mean, it was like magic. It was a sign that this is what I meant to do. And I chose one of them. And in 4 months, I was already a graduate student. So everything moved since I made this decision, following my heart and following the calling of my heart. Um, I I was already a graduate student, never regretted it. It was very difficult 6 years because again, I needed to improve my English, and it was a lot of graduate work, but never regretted it. And really, this was a sign of going with the flow.
So do you think in that story, in order to move with the flow, you had to be out of the flow to know that you needed to go back into it?
It's a beautiful question. And actually, many people ask it even in the wider perspective. Do we need to suffer in order to move forward? Do we really,
Mhm.
is this the only way to move forward if we suffer, if life shoves us into
Yes.
change? I don't know definitively. In my case, it was definitely the the case. In my situation, it was the case. Theoretically, I think yes, because when everything is good, we are not motivated to change. Um, we are creatures that we all love comfort and pleasure and leisure, not leisure as like not doing anything, comfort probably, pleasure and comfort. And
Agree.
when we have it, we are at peace, we are content. That is why I believe, yes, this is indeed true in general. Probably there are exceptions to this rule, that we need to suffer, we need to realize that we are out of the flow in order to do something and go into the flow.
Yeah.
What do you think? How
Yes.
would you
I
answer?
think the moments in my life where I have struggled and have been out of the flow have also been the most significant teaching moments. And I reflect on some of the really hard times in my life. But I am who I am because of them. So I do think they're necessary. They're not easy, but they're necessary. And I think through uh, a lot of reflection and inner work, those times get a little easier as the years go by. And so,
Mhm.
yeah.
And what about, I have a question in terms of knowing your calling, knowing what you would like to do, because I believe you and I are lucky enough to really know what we would like to do, or at least right now for the time being. But I know many people, many of my clients and some of people in my private life, they struggle with finding what to do and finding what their calling is. So my question is, what do you think, how people can, what can help them to find their calling, or at least to move in that direction?
Well, I've struggled with it a long time, and I still feel like I'm finding my calling. I think it is a day at a time. I think we're looking for this golden nugget that's going to solve all the angst and worry or suffering that we hold by not feeling fulfilled, or not, or doing something that doesn't fill us up or bring us joy, or is aligned to what we really truly want to do. And I don't think there's a silver bullet answer. That I think it's today, what's bringing me joy, what fills me up, um, and move steps towards that. I'm guilty of it. I have these massive, big dreams and visions for Kaya, and I want to be there. And I know I have to take probably a million steps before those dreams are realized. It's not to say that I can't realize them, but it's taking a step at a time and not trying to find the answer at once for me.
Good point. And I would like to add to it, because many people think that when they're unhappy at their present job, they think that they work just to put bread into the table, and sometimes they are the only breadwinner or the main breadwinner in the family, and they suffer. They don't like their job. They are there only for the money, and they tell me, I don't have the luxury to quit my job. And what I usually recommend is to squeeze the elements that they like to do, some hobbies or exploring other opportunities, whether they are still at their present job. So we don't necessarily have to drastically change what we do in order to move into a different direction. And I recall, I didn't quit my job in the corporate world right away. I actually only quit it when I had my first internship, psychotherapy internship when I had to be there 100%. Before that, I actually worked and went to graduate school. It was hard, but I think taking it one step at a time, plus squeezing the things that you love to do into your maybe mundane or difficult present work, it's also a possibility. What do you think of this?
Yes, I think we're taught to compartmentalize
Mm.
finding joy or fulfillment or peace in certain areas of our life. And part of my passion behind Kaya is not like breaking down the walls of compartmentalizing our lives and living fully in whatever section of our life we're in, whether that be our jobs, our personal life, our relationships, our family. That for me, when I was leading a marketing team, it was in the advertising industry. And I don't have a huge passion for advertising, but I have a huge passion for people and teams and relationships. And so when times got hard, it was easy for me to focus on the people that I was with. I loved who I was working with and around and being around them, not necessarily advertising. So
What I hear you, go ahead.
yeah, we're taught to find joy in our personal lives and just grind in our professional lives, or like we have to find fulfillment in our professional lives, and a relationship means this. And I think we just have to show up to our lives and create it for ourselves.
Very beautifully said. What I hear you say is that even if the job is difficult and you don't necessarily love it with your heart, finding something that you do love in this job. In your case, it is people. In someone's case, it's actually solving problems. If they are, I've heard from several computer programmers that it's a very mundane job, but they love the element of creativity. And so focusing on this element of creativity versus the bulk of relatively mundane job that they would need to do. So finding something that gives you joy in your present job. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, or in your family, or in your relationship, or in your anything.
But when you said show up fully with fully open heart no matter where you are, so if you are at your office right now doing whatever you are doing and your family is not, it's at home, or they are doing their jobs, it means finding here, not waiting until you come home.
Yeah.
And finding something here and now and being fully present at your work, finding something there that brings you joy. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Showing up with an open heart every moment of life.
Yes.
And I think this brings about the idea of presence that I think penetrates every moment of our life. If we want really to be fully alive, it means we need to be fully present, no matter where we are, what we're doing. And it's an interesting concept in itself. When you think or contemplate the concept of presence, what comes to mind?
Showing up with an open heart and being really open to the current, where I am, who I'm with, even like dropping preconceived thoughts or opinions, dropping stresses of what will happen, or is this good or bad, or should I be here or not, and just allowing myself to arrive.
Beautiful.
What about you? You've taught me a lot. You've taught me a lot about that, Marina.
Well, you see, the interesting thing is that I can teach you and guide you, but until you find it in yourself, you cannot either live it or articulate it.
Mhm.
And if you don't live it, you cannot articulate it,
Mhm.
because you can say the words that the books say, that you read, that you intellectually know, but until you experienced it, I don't believe you can articulate it as beautifully as you just articulated it. And for me, it is also not only showing up with an open heart, but also paying attention to details. We usually are so blinded with either goal, a task, or even the fact that we don't like our job blinds us. We just go there with our hunched, with our head down, doing our duty, and don't see so much around. We don't see the people, we don't see on our way to work, we don't see the beautiful flowers or the snow in early September as we have right now in Denver. It's beautiful. It's yesterday was 90 degrees and today is 30 degrees. It's some people complain about it. I think it's amazing what the Mother Nature does. So for me, presence, it's paying attention to details. And each time your mind carries you away, because it does, we're thinking creatures, we're thinking most of the time, and mostly thinking the same thing over and over. And our brain loves repetition. So bringing ourselves back to what is at hand.
Yeah.
If we're driving, focusing on what we see. If we are working, focusing on everything that is there beyond our preconceived ideas. Yes.
Yeah. I have two thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
One, a story, and one, a question for you. A story is, I was driving the other day and it was a one-way street. And on the left, this car was parking and jutted out to one of the lanes that the traffic was going in. And I was in the lane next to it. And he had stopped traffic in the lane that I was beside. And I stopped to let this car that was blocked from the car parking to go around. And he was so disgruntled and upset that the car in front of him was parking and in his lane that he didn't see me trying to let him around the car. And so he sat there so frustrated at the car that was blocking him that he couldn't see a way around. He had a very easy way around the car and he couldn't see me stop and let him in. And so I just kept going because I was blocking traffic too. But it was this kind of aha moment of, this person was so upset at what was going on in front of him that he forgot to kind of look around, and there was such an easy out that what was blocking him. So I don't know, maybe that was a long-winded story, but it was this
But
kind
it's
of
a very good story. It's a very good story. He was so focused on what he didn't like
yeah.
that he didn't see the opportunity that was right there in front of him. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah. And so my other question to you is, I too enjoy looking out my window and seeing snow, and I like putting on a long sleeve shirt and feeling a little chilly this morning after being so hot this summer, and finding some joy and presence in what we woke up to this morning. I think the other side of that is, this is the earliest it's ever snowed in Denver, in Colorado. What's going on with this weather? It's scary. It's global warming, the environment. And it takes you out of the present moment of just like, the wonder of what we woke up to worrying about our environment, which is also a valid concern and worry. So how do you balance that?
Yes, it's a good question. And my personal answer to that is always asking, what can I do to prevent global warming, to help slow it down? And I can preserve water, I can recycle, I can be more aware where I need to drive and where I don't need to drive. For example, I'll give you a small example. Not that long ago, I started turning water off when I brush my teeth. Before, I didn't even think about it. The water is there and I brush my teeth, it's running. And now even this little thing, I believe makes a difference. And this is something that is within my control. And what we often do is we start worrying about global warming or other social and political issues, talk a lot about it, but actually not doing anything about it. And our energy goes into talking. And we have this saying that using the metaphor of a locomotive, all the energy went into a toot instead of making the locomotive going. And this is what most of us do most of the time. We talk about social issues, social, political, personal, without doing anything about it. So this little act of preserving the water, recycling what we can recycle, not littering, or if we would like to take the step forward and contact the authorities, and if we choose to do it, doing this, but doing versus talking. I'm really not a big proponent of high social debates and discussing the issues. This is, to me, putting all the energy into a toot.
Well said. And probably limiting our creative inspiration or manifestation or action to do something.
Exactly.
It's hiding behind words versus kind of allowing, maybe there's a whole solution around global warming that we haven't discovered yet. And
exactly, like the car. It was so focused on discussing the issue that didn't see the possibility to go around. Exactly. And also, if our energy goes in this debating social issues, we take away our energy from living our life authentically, being present in our life, and serving based on what we can do and what we can give into the world. And that is why I wanted to ask you a question in terms of, I already asked about the calling. How do you find what is your calling? But also, how do you define for yourself what is your authenticity? What do you really want? What is your heart desire? How do you define it for yourself and live in accordance with it?
I don't know. I'm trying. I think that's my life's work. The voice and the fire and the calling inside of my heart is getting louder and stronger and more clear to hear and feel. I would say probably in the last 3 to 4 years than it ever has. And I think it will continue to get louder and stronger and evolve. But just to use our work together as an example, I would say I'm a shy person. Probably other people in my life would disagree, but I am insecure. I care what people think. I'm afraid to share my voice and speak up because I don't want to be judged. And so it's easier for me to hide and not say anything and just be safe in my little corner. And I know that's not my authentic truth and expression of who I am. So thank you for helping bring that out, because I need the help and support to do it, but it is a step in like finding my truth and voice and expression of myself. So it's this fire that I feel, and everything and every layer and every fear that covers it up is getting burned, I guess.
Well, you're welcome. And probably hear you speak right now, I don't think anybody would perceive you as a shy person, because you so openly express yourself and express yourself so beautifully that I guess for you it was just taking a risk. And for all of us, it takes taking a risk, because yes, most of us are preoccupied with what others think and how we will be perceived. and people see us in a certain light. And if we have always lived in accordance with being a nice girl or a nice boy, and now we are at task, looking at the task of just authentically showing up, many people may really get startled. So who is this person? And we are afraid of this. And that is why it takes the willingness to take a risk. And another thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about authenticity, that many people often mistaken it for originality. And I believe they're not the same. And I would like to ask you, when you contemplate originality versus authenticity versus originality, what's the difference?
I don't know. I don't know if I have a big difference. I'm curious to know your difference in it.
For me, being original means focusing on being different.
Yeah.
And authentic is focusing on being yourself. And these are two different things. Original, it means I would like to create something new that nobody ever created, or I'd like to be to show up as someone different. And when we really put our energy into being original, we miss out for being who we really are. We miss out. It's not our true heart desire. It's our intention is completely different.
It's
Shown up as different.
For others instead of
Yeah,
yourself.
exactly. Originality is always for others. It's being seen as different, as unique. And we are unique. We don't need to, to show off to be unique, because if only we show up out of our heart and who we truly are, and keep discovering it, keep reaping these layers of conditioning and preconceived ideas one by one, and peeling these layers. I said reaping, it's an element of aggression right there, but peeling these layers, not necessarily aggressively. And then coming into this authentic truth of, what do I love to do? How can I express myself authentically? And what's really, and I like the word that you used, fire. What does fire mean? What does make me want to, what gives me energy? Firing, it means giving you energy. And by the way, fire, if we use it again as a metaphor, it can burn you out. So how to use your energy sparingly so that you don't work 24/7, even on the project that is your heart desire, that is fired by your authentic truth, but also doing it in moderation and giving yourself some time and space to rest and to just do nothing.
Yes. What has helped you find your authentic expression and truth?
First of all, I'm still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As I gave you the story that at least I took a risk and stepped out and pursued my career here in this country. And this was the first step. But then there were moments when I identified so much with being a psychologist, psychotherapist, that I forgot that I am a person, I'm a human being. And I received some very negative feedback from some of my friends, through other friends, because, you know, people like to talk what others tell them about you. And I found out that I show up as this arrogant person who thinks that she knows and think that she knows everything. And I remember I cried because I didn't realize that I show up that way. It was a period in my life when I was probably very proud of getting a degree and thinking that I know. No, I don't. And I think it's an interesting process, still peeling the layers of how you want to be perceived versus what's your authentic truth. So I'm doing it every day.
Yes.
And what about you? What are you actually doing, or maybe not necessarily doing? How does it unfold for you to finding your authentic truth? Because you also said that you are still doing it. You are in the process of it. What does it entail?
I'm with you. I think you're never done.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think it's a daily exercise. I had this preconceived assumption that living authentically or finding that, I like to say, come as you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to come as you are is the easiest expression to of yourself, but it's really hard, and it does take courage and risk and days where you know it feels right and this is what your expression is, like the direction your expression is pointing you, but it's still hard and it doesn't feel great or it feels scary. And so I think allowing me to have both of those, hold both of those at the same time and do it anyway, is helping me.
Feel the fear and do it
Yes,
anyway.
exactly.
Beautiful words from the
Exactly.
song
I
of
want it to be easy and I want it to just like, flow exactly how I flowed to Chicago. Wow, that was well, it wasn't an easy move, but it was easy for me because that's just how my life was supposed to flow. And sometimes the flow feels a little harder than I want it to, but learning to keep going.
And when you were talking, a few more things came to mind. That very often when we start discovering our authentic truth, at least this is true for me, I found myself saying no, saying yes to the things that I mean no,
Mhm.
out of A, autopilot, and B, just wanting to keep being a good girl, to please people,
Mhm.
although my entire being is yelling no. And then what happens, and I actually have a good example this week that happened that showed me that I was not authentic when I said yes. And I actually meant no. And what happens is when you are doing something against your will, your authentic will, very often we become passive aggressive or we sabotage what we are doing because we're not in the flow. We are paddling against the stream. And the story is I am helping my daughter in her fashion design business, and she's a great designer and really has this novel ideas. She designs clothing for children, but she doesn't know how to sew. She learns how to do it, how to design as she goes. She learns it. But I think I told you I worked as a seamstress the first 9 months of my immigration to the United States. I know how to sew, and so I became a bridge between her and seamstresses, putting her designs into more technical stuff and communicating it to the seamstresses. And right now I'm involved in so many interesting, I'm still working as a psychotherapist. We're doing this project with Kaya, which I really love and would like to put more energy into. And I said that I will continue doing it until the next show. And I said yes, but I meant no. And when the first bunch of clothing came from Ukraine, what we realized that the many measurements were off, and I was the one who gave the measurements to the seamstresses. And when I contemplated it, I realized that it was most likely my sabotaging this project, which was not fair for my daughter, which was not fair for the company, for the project. And it was frankly an aha experience that I was not honest. I still would love to be a consultant, but I don't have the time or energy to be that much involved in the project. So it was a huge, huge learning experience for me. And I openly told her that this is what I felt most likely, that and I told her that it's unfair to her and it's unfair for the company, but at least I am aware of it right now.
Was it hard to tell her that?
Yes, it was hard because it was a very tense conversation, and she never blamed me for making these mistakes. But then I realized that I have to tell her, and there was a moment that I believe was good to tell the truth, and I used this moment to tell the truth. And frankly, it was a high experience for me. In our very intense conversation, I discovered this truth. I discovered that because I think I told her that she sabotages some of her projects. And at that moment, I realized that I sabotage my input into this project. It was really, right now, even when I'm recalling this, I have goosebumps because I was not aware of it. And this is another thing that what our mind does. Very often we are not aware how we sabotage ourselves and others. And when we start living more in tune with our authentic truth and say no when we mean no and say yes when we mean yes, we don't need to be passive aggressive or project things onto others or sabotage ourselves and others, because all these are unconscious things. The moment they become conscious, they actually stop being sabotage and being passive aggression and being projection. These are the core, these are defenses of, in psychology, they call the defenses of the ego. But the moment we become aware of them, they stop being defenses.
But why is it so hard for a lot of us to communicate when we then become aware and we know our truth of yes or no? Why is it so hard for us to communicate what is real for us? Especially when,
I believe, yeah.
The obvious answer is because the person's not going to like what we have to say, but that's also a projection and an assumption that I make.
Well, actually, this is not the first thing for me. For me, the first thing is that we already committed. We already promised. Mm-hmm. We already, most often, they already have our word. So when we realize that we actually gave the wrong word, it feels that it's not fair. I already promised. How can I drop the project halfway? But even this so my answer to your question is, first, because it's very difficult sometimes to back up. We are already fully engaged in the project. So if we find out early in the project, it's easier to say, no, I thought about it and I realized, no, I'm not willing or ready to engage. But when we're halfway, it's not that easy. But mere communication that this was sabotage on my part now helps me to be more involved in the project more honestly. Mm-hmm. And just saying, okay, this is how much time I'm actually willing to commit to this project. It already, just this mere awareness of something that I was not aware. So I guess the second question, it's difficult to become aware. And when we become aware, what do we do with it? Mm-hmm. It depends on the situation. Sometimes, yes, I agree with you. We know that if we back up in the middle of the project, it will leave at least one or sometimes many people unhappy, because they will say it's unfair, and they are right.
But let's just, what if it's not a project? What if it's something you haven't committed to? But it's let's just say, there's someone in your life that you don't want to see and they keep inviting you places. What is your truth? We've talked about this before.
Actually, yes, this is tough one, because what happens when we become more and more aware and realize these things that were covered with, when we are passive aggressive or we project things onto others or we sabotage, these are unconscious things. Mm-hmm. So the first step is becoming aware of this, and it's difficult in itself. But when we become more aware, we realize that many people in our life are those who are not aware yet. Mm-hmm. And the question is, do we want to keep them in our life or not?
Mhm.
With some of them, we are bound for life, now families, and especially immediate family. And I believe that in most circumstances, it is good to still keep some contact, at least some contact with your family, maybe not even close if you feel that you are not close people. And sometimes, who said it? I think Richard Bach said, rarely do people who are soul brothers and sisters live under the same roof. And this is true. But I believe all family members are in our life for a reason. And they can be very good teachers if we allow them to teach us. Uh, but if we're talking about acquaintances and friends, sometimes it is very difficult, but we need to say that this relationship doesn't work. Interestingly enough, in romantic relationship, it happens pretty often. People break up, but in friendships, it's much harder to do. Even though our entire being tells us it's not working anymore, and we may stop calling the person or stop answering the phone calls or texts, and the person gets it, or maybe at some point he or she will get it. But not many of us are willing or able to just directly say into our friends' eyes, our relationship is not working anymore. Maybe we need to take a break. Why is it? Probably because it's not common, probably because it's against our culture. We're not used to doing it. This is my belief.
Yeah. And
Would you agree with it?
I would, but I also think in having tough conversations, uh, relationships or life gets so much richer. Like something that could come of that conversation is either maybe the end to a friendship or a deepening of the friendship. And
Beautiful.
we skirt away from like the richness of life because we don't want to upset people or we want to keep things just like a-okay. But I think the times where I have gone into conflict, whether that be in relationships or family or friendships, they've gotten richer and stronger, and um, some have ended, but I think most have. Most I feel really at peace with the conflict.
I love what you just said, because what you actually said, the way I heard it, is that we often assume immediately that it will break our relationship or it will be difficult for us to address it. And in reality, we don't know how our conversation will end. And again, this is an element of the power of not knowing, is when we really state our truth. And because of our conditioning, because of our habits, we think that this will lead to a conflict and necessarily ending end of the relationship. Very often it doesn't. The more honest we are, the more likely we actually deepen the relationship and make it more alive than have dead if
I
we
think
don't.
it goes back to finding your authentic truth and ways to find it and ways to live it and express it. And I'm so drawn to people that are so free in themselves, and you can tell immediately. I can tell, of yeah.
And what is it? What is it when you said immediately you can tell? And I agree with you 100% that when you meet a person who is feels good in his or her skin, who found their authentic truth, who are themselves, we are drawn to them. There is something about them that immediately wants us to be in their presence. But what do you think? What is it? How do you know it?
For me, it's more energetic than anything they say or do. I think it's this composure of they're not trying, they're not, it doesn't feel like it's just this peace that they have and that I can feel when I'm around people.
It feels that they are not trying too hard.
Yes. And, you know, I think people that live in their authentic truth can be flamboyant and crazy and off the wall, or really stoic and quiet. And both of those truths exist in the world. And finding, you've taught me, everyone has like Hitler and Gandhi in them, and like finding where you fall, but even in the personalities of, you know, very outwardly focused and inwardly focused, that those that have found where they fall on the scale are just at peace. Yeah. And I think our culture and society kind of celebrates people talking and people sharing and people flaunting. And I don't know. I think that's where I struggle, especially in putting my voice out into the world of what's authentic and what's a show or what's a facade.
I think you said it really well, especially bringing up the show,
Mm.
showing off. Showing off immediately suggests, or when person is bragging or the person is talking too much about themselves, immediately suggests that they're not at peace. Because a person who is at peace with themselves, who is in tune with their authentic truth, and I agree, energetically you can feel it, and it's sometimes very difficult to describe. But if we try to describe, it's not needing external, not fishing for the external confirmation of their importance, not showing off, not bragging, not pulling the attention to them all the time. The person who is the most self-confident actually may not be seen at all, and be completely at peace with that. So yes, there are some people who are flamboyant and this is their natural expression of themselves, but there are people who just observe and completely at peace with observing. They don't need to be necessarily seen or heard. And but at the same time, even though they don't say much, you want to hear more from them. And those sometimes who say a lot, you want them to shut up.
I guess that was a question that I had earlier in the conversation when we were talking about the doing versus talking of, you know, global warming or politics or whatever, that people like to talk a lot, but what are they doing? Or, you know, where are they putting their energy? Why is there such a need to be heard? Why is there such a need to talk?
It's a great question. I believe it's a compensation for not being, it's a defense for not being yourself and not knowing your authentic truth. Is I am important, see me. But when you are important, and you are, everyone is, and you see it, you don't need anybody else to see it. So you only need to be heard and to show off. And this country is great in showbiz. This country really, and I believe there is a best show business in the world is in the United States, no question about it. And people love to participate in these shows, and there's a huge competition to be on the stage. Can you imagine to be on Broadway or any big stage? It's a huge competition. Or to become a movie star, or to become just the entire culture cries, see me, and doesn't pay enough attention to, do I see myself? Yeah. Do I live? Do I live? It's hard, you know, it's really hard to put this energy into words, because every word skews it a little bit. And I believe, again, I would like to bring up the idea of the flow. Am I in the flow? Am I in the flow of life when my energy, my individual unique energy, is in sync with the energy of the universe? And when it is, I'm the most efficient, I'm the happiest, I am the most inspirational for others. And I guess in terms of creativity and self-expression, I am the most creative when I am in the flow, when my flow is in sync with the universal flow or the flow of life.
Yes, it's so beautifully said.
And going back into how to live your life. And by the way, something that came up to me, I was raised without using any cuss words. I never heard any cuss word from my parents. And to that day, it's easier to hear them in English because for me in English, it's still a little barrier. So they're not attack me directly. But in my native language, I cannot hear cuss words. I immediately freeze. And I guess by trying to overcome it, for example, today in our conversation, I said, shut up. And I cannot let go of it because it's not authentic to me. Because it's like, and I'm asking myself, is it because I'm worrying how I'm perceived? Perhaps, but still, these are not the words that I use in my daily life. So this is one of the examples when it's very hard to differentiate between, do I authentically cannot, is it my authentic truth that I cannot cuss, or is it culturally conditioned? And I believe it's both. Mm-hmm. But this word, again, it was not in the flow. Mm-hmm. It was more of trying to fit in. Mm-hmm. Because many people not many, but some people in my life use cuss words, or even, this probably is not a cuss word, but at least a rude word, casually. And when they do it often, either you see them as it's their portrait that you draw in your head, or maybe it is natural for them, but it's definitely not natural for me. And I'm still processing it.
So interesting. I have two thoughts. One, it's kind of endearing that you think shut up is a cuss word. And I didn't, I recall I'm trying to think back of the context of when and how you said it, and I can't even remember you saying it. So it's interesting what hangs in you, and I can't even remember you saying it in this conversation.
Yes. And I think for me, thank you for sharing this with me, because obviously I'm conditioned not to use cuss words and be very critical and self-critical of using them. But the most interesting part for me is that I cannot differentiate whether it is conditioned and I would like to be seen as a polite person, or whether it is really against my core nature. At this point, I don't know. And I guess I will leave with that peace with not knowing whether it's my authentic truth or whether it is deeply conditioned. I lean toward conditioning. Because as you said today, yes, I do believe that we all have all archetypes, and Hitler archetypes, and Gandhi and Mother Teresa archetypes in ourselves. And under certain kind of circumstances can behave like either of them, expressing the best of human nature and expressing the worst of human nature. And I think contemplating this idea may be healing, because some people, especially those who were many Jewish people in my life, whose family died in Holocaust. My own grandfather died in Holocaust. He was killed by Nazi Germans in Kharkov, my native city in Ukraine, in the concentration camp. It's a horror story, but they cannot even contemplate the idea of having Hitler in themselves. And because, again, of a lot of cultural conditioning. But I believe if we take a risk and say, well, sometimes when I feel when I feel prejudices against a certain group of people, whoever they are, men, or all women, all Black people, all white people, all people of color, all people of different. So when we take a group of people and give a label to it, it's Hitler in us. And if we believe that one group of people is superior to another group of people, whatever this group is, it's a Hitler in us. And on the other hand, when
the Mother Teresa in us.
Pardon me?
Give us an example of the Mother Teresa.
Yes, well, the first example that comes to mind, each time when we are observing a person in pain and we feel pain, we feel compassionate. And I believe all of us did, or most of us, probably sociopath people with the illness of the brain, where they cannot regret or remorse, and when they cannot feel compassionate. This is probably a biological problem with the brain. But for most people, we feel compassionate at some point in our life. We have felt compassionate. And when we feel pain, observing a person or creature in pain, this is Mother Teresa in us.
And the connection to everyone and everything in the world.
Yes, connection in terms of that. It may sound theoretical, it may sound too dry, but we are indeed one. We are the same organism, the same consciousness, spirit, call it whatever you choose, in different bodies. And I really like the analogy, again, the analogy of water. It's probably the best metaphor I know for consciousness and body, that all consciousness is an ocean and each human body is a wave. And we're still water, even though we form waves and then waves come and go, but water remains, the ocean remains. This is what our spirit or our universal consciousness is. And in that, everything is Hitler's, Mother Teresa's, and everything in between. And in that, we can connect. Because all the layers and barriers of our bodies and our cultures is what divides us. But in that, we connect. And most often it becomes prominent, again, coming back to your question of suffering and do we need to suffer in order to move on or in order to change? I guess, yes, in suffering, we can feel as one more than in anything else. Even in joy, because in big joy, we also can feel as one. But in suffering, I think it's more prominent, it's more palpable. When you cry and I cry, we know this feeling of pain in which we can connect.
Yeah. It's beautifully said. And I think a great way to end our conversation, and just like, may we all find the flow of our river and swim in that river with the current, and in that be able to be really at peace of coming as we are, of finding who we are and what that expression is.
Amen.
Love you.
I love you too.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We love your questions, so submit your questions and feedback, and thank you.
Thank you.